Worked in sustainability and conservation related roles for over 20 years for both state and local governments, NGOs, and also NGOs as a consultant and in higher education as an educator. He holds a master's degree in social science and environmental policy, and for the last 7 years, he assumed the role of CEO of Moreland Energy Foundation Limited, or MEFL, a unique non-for-profit community organization dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. MEFL works with households, businesses, community groups, and governments on innovative approaches to achieving energy efficiency and increasing renewable energy supply. Prior to his current role, Paul worked as an independent sustainability consultant for government and corporate clients. He's also a lecturer at RMIT University, coordinating an environmental impact assessment course in their master's program. Mr. Murfitt, or Paul, also received as a board member of the Consumer Action Legal Center and is the chair of the Northern Alliance for Greenhouse Action in Australia. Mr. Paul Murfitt.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out to hear us this morning. It's great to be in Penang. It's my first trip to Malaysia and to Penang, and it's been great. I've only been here 2 days, but I feel like I'm really getting to know the place. And so thanks for everyone, for the Institute for inviting me, and thanks for the hospitality that I've experienced since I've been here. And I look forward to the rest of my time here. It's been really interesting listening to the speakers so far. Yesterday, a great range of views from very different perspectives. Today, I want to talk about the experience of our community, which is a community of around 160,000 people in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. So Melbourne is the second largest city in Australia, and the municipality that I'm from is in the inner to middle city. We have, our metropolitan area is broken up into 30 or so local government areas, and in Australia at the moment, local government is the most active sphere of government when it comes to climate change. So, and I'm pleased to say that Moreland is considered one of the leaders in its approach to climate change. So hopefully what I can provide to you today is a sense of what a relatively well-resourced local government with a high level of sustainability commitment can look to achieve when we're looking at addressing climate change. My other objective with today's presentation is to really reinforce that I think what community climate action is about, it's about economic transformation. It's not necessarily about doing the right thing. I think it's more about transforming our economy into a truly sustainable basis. I was pleased with yesterday's discussion and the presenters in the audience now when we were talking about the 3 ages of development, and that we're approaching the age of sustainability. I think what underpins the age of sustainability is economic transformation away from patently unsustainable industries through to more sustainable examples, as we've heard examples of this morning. The key point in that, and we experience that in Australia and you experience it here, is that when we transform economies, there'll be winners and there'll be losers, and those that are potentially losers do all they can to hold on to the current situation. So it's not going to be a smooth transition, and there will be winners and losers, but it's one that we urgently have to undertake. So that's really the context for how we approach community action. It's not necessarily about doing the right thing, it's about doing the necessary. As I mentioned, our community in Moreland is comprised of about 160,000 people. That means about 60,000 households, about 8,000 businesses. About 40% of our population were born overseas, and around the same number of people speak a language other than English at home. So we're a very diverse community from a range of backgrounds. But equally, it's a very committed community. Moreland is known locally as quite an environmentally conscious community. We have a variety of socio-economic groups, from relatively low socio-economic groups in the north of our municipality through to the middle class, if you like, as you get closer to the city. So it's a fairly diverse place. This is a pretty scary graph, but I think it's worth taking the time to look at it. We did quite a lot of analysis of our municipal greenhouse gas emission sources, and we did this, it was a very difficult piece of work to do, but we did it on the basis that we came to a conclusion that we need to focus on the measures that are going to have the biggest impact. So we really needed to orient all of our resources towards those activities that were causing most of the emissions. So fundamentally, this sort of data doesn't really exist at a municipal level. You can look at this sort of data at a national level, but you can't really get this sort of data at a municipal level to any degree of accuracy. So we undertook some basic research that lasted about a year to understand precisely what energy and other activities, which of those contributed the most to our emissions. So on the back of this analysis, we then plotted what sorts of measures are available to address those emissions. Now this is another scary looking figure, but it basically what it's saying is that the bigger the balloon or bigger the bubble, the more emissions reduction potential there is, and the lower the bubble on that graph, the more cost effective that measure will be. So this was a way for us to look at, well, what are all the opportunities for reducing emissions? How much will it cost us to do that? And how much emission reduction can we expect from undertaking those measures? So you can see in our particular context in Melbourne, Australia, probably one of the biggest measures available to us was household solar PV, this bubble right here, and a range of others. So this analysis then led us to be able to prioritise where we'll focus our resources as a community on looking at greenhouse gas emission reduction. One of the important things with our fundamental resource was also to understand where our energy was being used geographically. So this is a map of our municipality, and we were able to source electricity data and gas consumption data per tariff class. So electricity and gas consumed by households, electricity and gas consumed by industry and by commercial operators, and by location. So we were able to start to track in our municipality where the energy, for example, was being consumed. So you couple that sort of information with the information about cost and benefit of measures like solar PV or like energy efficiency, and we can start to target our programs to particular regions in the city. So it helps us to be much more specific about where we target our efforts in an attempt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. all of that background research and analysis and getting a better understanding of our municipality has led to our strategy that was adopted this year by our local government called Zero Carbon Evolution. It's an interesting strategy because it's based on specific data. Moreland, like a number of municipalities in the early 2000s, was making grand commitments to zero carbon outcomes by dates such as 2020 or 2030. And as those dates started to become, closer on the horizon, those political commitments became quite scary because politicians at the local and state level were thinking, well, how are we going to achieve this? What's it going to take? And we see at the moment a number of authorities walking away from their commitments to significant reductions. In Moreland, the approach we took was to say, well, what is it actually going to take to reduce emissions by a proportion that heads us on the track to zero? So what we did then is look at the concept of a global carbon budget. Yesterday there was some analysis provided around what level of emissions we can tolerate to avoid dangerous climate change as a globe. There is a certain amount of emissions it's broadly agreed that if we go beyond that amount of emissions, we'll experience temperature rises that will lead to catastrophic results. To be able to avoid those outcomes, we need to limit the amount of emissions that we generate from here on. So there's a global figure. Our Climate Change Authority in Australia then worked out what the proportion of that is for Australia, based on our economy, based on the sorts of activities that we undertake, and we have that figure there of 10,100. That represents the amount of megatons that Australia can reasonably participate in emitting and keep below that 2-degree threshold. So for the Moreland community, we did the same. We worked back down from that global figure, how many tonnes of emissions are we can we reasonably expect to emit and avoid climate change, catastrophic climate change, by doing our share. So there's a lot of controversy in that sort of methodology, but we needed to look at, well, if Moreland were doing our share to avoid dangerous climate change, how much would we need to reduce? And the answer is around 24.5 megatons. So even though it's just a number, what it does is give us a scale of what we need to aim for. So that scale then translates into more tangible figures that we can try to communicate to our community. So at the moment in our community each year we generate around 1,400 or 1,500 kilotons of greenhouse gas emissions. For us to be doing our share, we'd need to reduce that down to under 1,200 kilotons. So that's a reduction of around 22% by 2020. So that's the target that we've adopted, and now we've done some very detailed planning about how we scale up our programs to achieve a 22% reduction in emissions by 2020 in an effort to do our share to avoid dangerous climate change. Now, while these numbers and while the measures may not be directly applicable to your community, the notion is the same. I think we've all collectively got to come to terms with the scale of change that needs to occur for us to avoid dangerous climate change. It's not really about small projects that demonstrate sustainable lifestyles. It's too little, too late. We actually need transformational projects that are going to fundamentally change the way we generate energy and the way that we basically live our lifestyles. I'm going to come back to this figure, and I promise this is the last scary one that I show you, but it really, I think, is a really important concept to get across. And it's the concept that frames the programs that we develop in the foundation and with a lot of my colleagues. Basically what this figure is saying is that to change the dominant economic approach, we need to foster new ideas and help them to thrive. And we apply this to new sustainable technologies, new ways of doing things, new economic instruments, and the basic concept is that you can see up here, the starting point is around research and development, through to applying that in demonstration, implementing demonstration projects, pre-commercial developments, then getting applications in niche markets, and then finally full commercialisation. So what we're trying to do here is support new sustainable ways of doing things right through from when they're first conceived through to mass market application. So a fairly standard economic development process. With that, the role of government and the role of the market needs to be understood as well. So when an idea is in its early stages, it relies on a good level of government support to bring it through these early stages of research and development, demonstration, pre-commercial activity. As the product or the approach becomes more entrenched or viable, then the market takes over, theoretically. So the resources required to drive the product out to full commercialisation start to come from the market. We get investors from the private sector, and government can pull away a little bit. So this framework, I think, is really important to determine and inform where we put our efforts, where we as a community put our collective resources to direct the market, what we ask of our governments, and what we tell our private sectors providers are priorities for us. So our programs, even though they're community-based, are very much about trying to transform the market as much as possible. I'll come back to that slide a little bit later. So I want to talk a little bit about the strategy so you get a sense of the scale, because I think that is the important element to convey rather than the detail. But our strategy to achieve the 22% reduction by 2020 relies on 5 key themes, and they are generating local renewable energy, using energy efficiently, low carbon transport, minimising the urban heat island effect, and activating and supporting the community. So we have these 5 key themes, and they're not too different to what you might find in Osaka or anywhere else, but what we've done in our strategy is really go down to the next level and articulate what it is we need to do, how much it's going to cost, and hopefully where that money's going to come from. And I'll run through particularly the renewable energy and the energy efficiency elements of these 5. So with renewable energy, and to get a sense of the scale of what we're needing to achieve, and remember, we're only trying to achieve what we think is absolutely necessary for us to do our share in avoiding dangerous climate change. And so this is talking about a community of 60,000 households. We're saying we need to get solar on the roofs of over 20,000 of those 60,000 households. So we need to get coverage of a third of houses with solar by 2020. Businesses, we're aiming for 1,200 businesses out of a total of 8,000. Community-owned facilities is about 60 systems we're aiming to implement, and community-owned systems, which I'll go into a little bit more, we're aiming to do over 20 of those. So that scale is really significant. If we're looking at a third of our houses, over 10 to 20% of our businesses, a lot of our other roof spaces just covered with solar, to achieve all of that, that's going to achieve about 9% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a lot of investment for under 10% emissions reduction. But it does paint very clearly what sort of scale we're going to have to implement to make these changes. The sorts of models that are emerging, I think, are interesting, and this is one project we did last year with the local secondary college. And this has got a 40 kilowatt system on the roof, and it's funded through a mixture of parents subscribing to the building fund and also parents buying their own PV systems at home, and a proportion of the savings that they're making going towards paying off this centralised school system. So this has got a range of different fundraising measures, but it's quite an iconic showpiece, and it's a significant chunk of PV on a local roof. The school didn't have the money to do it outright, so they needed to look at alternative funding strategies. So what we're doing at our foundation at the moment is using aerial photography to look at the different buildings around the municipality and understand where there's good spaces for photovoltaic panels. So where we can see that there's a good array potential, and we understand what use goes on in that building, we can do the maths and understand whether there's an economically viable installation the opportunity. And if there is, then we'll make connection with the building owner. We'll start to talk them through the concept of the financial outlay and return that they can expect, and try to convince them also of other benefits such as the corporate social responsibility or being a good local corporate citizen might bring to them. So it's quite a strong part of our strategy that we're identifying these opportunities, doing the maths on them, and trying to convey and recruit the businesses to install PV. This is the sort of analysis that we can do remotely. We don't need to visit the site. We can get from the aerial work, we can understand how much can be generated. We get a copy of their bill. We can plot against their bill how much it will cost them, how much they will save, estimate their payback periods for that investment, and hopefully bring that business to a position to install. What we're doing here, and it's based on a lot of our experience in the past, is we're doing the hard work for either the household or the business. We know that people have a lot of goodwill, but we know they also don't act without a great deal of assistance because some of this is too complicated. It's very difficult for a business that has a lot of other priorities to be focusing on analysing the financial implications of investing in photovoltaics. So we do that for them. We do a lot of the hard work for those that we want to recruit. It's I've just extracted a table from a report that we've recently done. I really like this project because it demonstrates how we can work with government to achieve scale in deployment. This is a project we did with low-income households in a neighbouring municipality. And basically what the idea is that low-income folk are those that can least afford the increasing costs of energy, and photovoltaic or PV panels are coming down in price. So the proposition was that we would go and put PV panels on the roofs of low-income households. The local government paid for those panels up front, but the low-income house owner would then commit to paying back the cost of those panels over the next 10 years through their rates, through their quarterly payment to the local government. They would increase their payment slightly to the local government to cover the cost for 10 years, but that increase was less than the amount that they saved in energy cost. So from day one, these low-income households were paying less for energy. After 10 years, they'll own the system outright and basically be getting that energy for free. So economically, or financially for low-income households, this project made sense on a number of fronts. So from a total of about 8,000 low-income households that were eligible for the initial project, we signed up 300 and they're being installed at the moment. So 300 systems on 300 households. Those households are paying less in their energy costs from day one, and it's making quite a significant contribution to emissions reduction. So this is the sort of model that we need to start to deploy at scale. So we've been able to achieve in our pilot project 300 households. We're looking to do thousands of households over the next several years. But the financial case works in Melbourne. It may not work here now, but we need to work out other models that might work here if we're going to pursue these sorts of numbers. The other model that I'm quite excited about, and we're just kicking off our first project now, is called community solar. So this is really targeted at those people that live in apartments or that rent their properties and don't really have the permission, if you like, to put solar onto their own roofs. This is a way that community members can invest in a solar panel array that's maybe located on a local warehouse, maybe located on one of their apartment blocks, but the financing for the system is coming from a group of individual members. The array is installed on the facility, and over time those people that put up the initial money, they'll have that paid back to them through selling the electricity that's generated. And we've done the financial assessment on this. There is a slight margin to be made, so those people that are investing may even get return beyond what they put in the first place. It's involving us needing to establish a separate legal entity, so we've established a cooperative that will gather in the investments and manage the payback over time. We'll bill the person who's using the energy, and we'll manage all those financial transactions. This is staffed by community volunteers, so anyone who works in the cooperative is a volunteer, and any of the funds that we raise will go back into further projects. So it's quite an exciting model. It's starting to get very popular in Australia. It's very well established in places like Germany and the UK and some other areas, but the economics of it are just starting to work in Australia. But you can see that the leading proponent here is the community. The community's doing all of the management, and they're contracting in other services to build, design and construct and operate the facility. Local government, importantly, is playing the role of a facilitator and using local policies and laws to support the project. So that's a summary of our renewable energy strategy, looking at solar on community facilities, solar in businesses, solar in schools, community-owned solar. So it's a very big component of what we're trying to achieve. Similarly with energy efficiency, we're looking to impact on a large proportion of our households. So energy efficiency retrofits to 36,000 households, a 40% reduction in energy consumption for over 11,000 new dwellings. So in Moreland, we are undergoing quite a level of rejuvenation in terms of our housing stock. A lot of older stock is now coming to the end of its life, but it's being replaced with high-density apartment style housing. The local government in Moreland has been able to push the standards up significantly higher for these new buildings, such that any new building built today will be about 40% more efficient than predecessor buildings. So that achievement of getting a new regulation that really lifts the bar for the energy efficient performance of new buildings will save us about 40% in terms of energy consumption. So that's an important measure for us. The other areas are energy efficiency retrofits in households and in businesses. Now there's, and it was spoken of yesterday, there's probably quite easily between 10 and 30% efficiency gains to be picked up in any building, any business, any home. Really, lie there in waiting to be picked up. So they're really basic things like how buildings are lit, how they're heated and cooled, the sorts of equipment that people have in their homes. So while it's probably not as exciting as renewable energy and as appealing in some levels, it's where there's a lot of emissions and dollars savings to be made. So it's also quite labour intensive. We work with a range of local businesses. We've done analysis about, say, the 5 top sorts of business sectors we have in Moreland. We then look at the 5 top energy efficiency opportunities for those sectors, and then we target those businesses again with trying to communicate quite simply and quickly the opportunity for them. And so the sorts of businesses are manufacturing facilities, retail, accommodation, office facilities. They're our major business types, catering as well. So this is a fact sheet that we've produced for the manufacturing, and really then it just talks about the key opportunities that are available to them in relatively simple terms. So air compressor leaks is a big source of energy wasting in the manufacturing sector in Moreland. Inappropriate or inefficient lighting is another one. So it's really trying to communicate these opportunities very simply so that people aren't threatened about implementing them. And importantly, in our economy, the financial savings that are to be had are really significant. Our energy prices have gone up by 100% in the last couple of years, and our gas prices are looking at tripling over the next couple of years. So the financial argument is getting stronger and stronger in our economy. This is another example of one from retail trade that we've worked with, and they're relatively simple measures again, refrigeration particularly, insulation in the roof, those sorts of things. We've also have a relatively simple assessment approach to understand what those key opportunities are relatively quickly and at low cost. So this is an example of an assessment we've done of an apartment block in St Kilda on the other side of Melbourne, and we've been able to look at what the key 3 opportunities are. And these, when you restrict your focus to the top 2 or 3, it's much easier for the business or the owner to contemplate implementation. And then when you help them to source the product and you give them independent advice about the quality of those products, it makes it even more simple. Okay, there's a bit more detail in there. I want to just quickly talk about household engagement. We did a number of years ago a program where we engaged almost 5,000 of our local households in the hope that they would join with us in reducing their emissions by at least 20%. We'd approached it with this 5-step program that was basically you would join up, you would measure your footprint, the emissions that were attributable to your household. You'd look at the easy things that you could do straight away. You'd plan for more expensive and more difficult things like solar or insulating your walls, and then you'd keep on that path. We found that people didn't really operate that way. Some people were interested in calculating their footprint, others completely weren't. Some people didn't want to do the easy stuff, they wanted to go straight for solar or something more expensive. So we've really revised the way that we engage with our households, and the focus of our activities now is on doing those hard things for people. So we put expressions of interest out to the market, and we assess all the solar companies that are within our market as to which are the best value for money. We do the same with lighting products, we do the same with insulation products, the same with electric bikes. So people can come to us as an independent authority and know that they've got a good price and a quality product. And so we're really helping them to do that sort of analysis, and that's resulting in people making the purchases and making the changes. I won't dwell on that. The other key elements of the strategy, and I've got electronic and hard copy versions of the strategy if people want those. Low emissions transport, I won't go into too much detail here, but again, I think it's useful to look at the scale that we need to achieve. 25% reduction in car trips for personal use, 25% reduction in car trips for work, looking to establish 500 car share bays. We currently have over 100 vehicles in the municipality that are operated under a car share arrangement where you can join the car share club. I'm not sure, do you have them in Malaysia? So basically the vehicles are parked at strategic locations around the town, and you don't have to own a car essentially. You can use the swipe card to get into the car and you pay by the hour, and it's relatively cheap to do that. It avoids you having to own a second car or even a first car. You don't need to pay insurance and those sorts of outlays. And we find that it does reduce emissions significantly. We're also looking to support implementation of infrastructure to charge electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are also becoming quite a hot topic, I guess, in Australia. There's seen to be a lot of potential for electric vehicles to replace vehicles in the city, but also to use as storage, use their batteries as storage for solar power generation. So there's quite some exciting opportunities there around transport, but very challenging at the same time. Importantly, with all of our strategies, and I don't know whether you can see this very well, but it's just there for the structure, we have our goals at 2020, we have the actions that we're committing to undertake as a community, but we also talk about what other levels of government need to do. We need the state government, we need the federal government to provide policies and programs that will support our strategy. So part of our strategy is very strong advocacy. It's trying to change the mind of for example, our federal government, who at the moment is very focused on exploiting our coal reserves at the expense of our renewable energy industry. So we realise we can't do this as a community by ourselves, but we also know that we can be strong advocates to other levels of government. So there's a very strong advocacy theme in here as well. I won't go into detail on this one. The last program I want to talk about is Go5, which is a campaign that we started a few years ago. And if anyone was here yesterday, there was a lot of talk about the level of water consumption in Penang and broadly in Malaysia and in the region, and some comparisons between the level of consumption, say in Singapore, which was at around, I think it was 150 litres per person per day, and Penang was almost double that, I think. It was quite a significant factor above. And a bit of discussion about well, where are the incentives for change. Several years ago, Australia was in the midst of quite a severe drought, and that was a 10-year drought, and our water storages in Melbourne reduced down to about 30%, which was the lowest they've been for a long time. So there was a community education campaign called Target 155, and that was to try to convince people that they should consume no more than 155 litres per day per person in a household, and it was a very effective campaign. We actually, over 3 to 4 years towards the end of the drought, achieved quite an extent of cultural change within the community. It was no longer appropriate for people to be hosing down their driveways or washing their cars. They could only wash their cars in a car park facility, car wash facility that recycled all its water, for example. So it became socially unacceptable to be seen to be washing your car or doing those sorts of measures. So it was a really, really effective campaign. So we tried then to emulate that or copy that with regard to electricity. Electricity is much harder to talk about. People understand water, they understand it's much more tangible. So we've come up with this Go 5 campaign, which is in our pilot projects has proved to be really quite effective. It's basically saying that up to 5 kilowatt hours per person per day in a household should be a benchmark that you should try to get below and keep shooting to get further below. There's a website that supports all of this, so you can go to the website, you can put in your electricity consumption, and it'll give you a sense of where you sit with regard to the benchmark. So again, it's trying to get people a bit of a mental picture of whether they're a good performer, a poor performer, and what they could do better. So the website then supports people to take other actions. And importantly, they can then compare their own results with people in their local suburb. Excuse me. So these figures in the blue dots there are the average per person per day consumptions across those municipalities, and you can see that some suburbs are much higher than others. So if you know what your consumption looks like with respect to your neighbours, the research indicates that you're more likely to be motivated to undertake action. And that's the proposition we're working off there. Okay, so I did just briefly, before I close, want to return to this figure. And as I said at the start, it is fairly complex, maybe a little too complex, but just reflecting back on what we're trying to achieve with this figure, and it is to bring some of these products and services to mass market appeal. We're trying to bring domestic photovoltaic, for example, through to being more than a demonstration project, to being something that the mass market gets behind. When we recently released our expression of interest, we got responses from all of the big solar players. So they really, I think, do see a big potential in solar, and they do see the value of having community as an independent advisor support their product. So I think if we keep in mind that what we're on about here in community climate change action isn't necessarily about trying to feel like we're doing the right thing, it is about driving change within the broader economy so that the age of sustainability, which hopefully we're entering, can be established in time to avoid impacts such as dangerous climate change. So thanks for your attention.